Hello, America and world, humanity, the worms. We've been in a semi-ancient trap, worse than unaddressed, since modern times. Um, so the worms, the soil, you can put chemicals on the soil, make the soil last, but you're already disconnected from the hyper Native American system, and then hyper additionally, it is connected further from the Native American system, sickly distinctly from ourselves, each individually grouped and together, sickly and distinctly against ourselves, per breaching method. Now this true always. All exceptions, exception nature appearing to be in demonstration of other are in demonstration of the same thing, while simultaneously being about what exception nature is about, which is where and how it uses our words, values, distinctly from ourselves. Woke. It uses the word woke in consciousness. If people are fighting about uses of it and fighting against uses of it, we're using it honestly, it would advance understanding of consciousness. The identity of matter came before matter. And then while as matter, hyper additionally, making more and more of its identity of forever nature, which is one of the things it is constantly. We are temporary slash lasting exceptions. An exception nature and demonstration of the same thing, though, which is simultaneously about the value of our quality of diffusion, which is simultaneously a semi-nature relationship to the hyper-simultaneous. Its complete identity of relationship to itself. We know. We can look, we take a basic college or high school, we should be doing this in grammar school about the cells, the cell body, cell wall, cell nucleus. One of the reasons the sciences are abridged, individually grouped and together, and it measured to maintain styles of logic, natures, such as criminal insidiousness natures, of positive and negative treatment uses, of identity grounds, voices, names, individually grouped and together. Where did slavery come from? Where did colonization come from? It came from some people using individually grouped and together. Alliance, oh, these are alliances, this is how these are enemy. It came from now the sciences became criminally foreign influenced before everyone was born, before the births of modern nations each, before America's founders were even born, North and South, sickly distinctly through other colonizing lands, named, but individually grouped and together too. They were used remotely, individually grouped and together, blaming other things, others or selves for the real causes, for example, of negative value nature progressions, acts and natures, everywhere, therefore at all locations, areas, and states. And that was maintained because of quality of fact-achieving nature that's defending itself with crazy laws that were slavery laws against every single person, sickly distinctly. Sickly, such a way, consciously, where everyone, to me, sickly, how non-distinctly, everyone not realized. Everyone's not blaming the breaching method, the predicate acts delivery system method, the hyper criminal insidiousness delivery system method that bound all these distinct identities of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, excuse me, wherever there's a positive or a negative treatment. There is an identity treatment. All that is invisible but still discernible. English and languages are about the invisible but still discernible. and then we come, for example, the subject and the verb. They are two distinct identities of volume, as that which is invisible but still discernible, that we could agree about. Now, if we disagree about things, the actual premises have to be the actual, like for example, sequence. If people are discrediting the value of sequence truth, that came before the order of the finite, smallest finite detail, now grouped in all together. For example, America's Republic. Before it was preserved here, and while it is being preserved here, it is still being degraded. It is measured and maintained by a breaching method. Effectively, we left out how our founding parents didn't have free speech. Every single person was worse than extorted. George Washington was worse than extorted. James Madison, most importantly, was most extorted. How sickly distinctly they had slavery north and south. No, don't forget they made the Native Americans fight with the Native Americans, and that had been sustained since before our founding parents were even born. And they had to hide their actual roles. Everyone had to make individually grouped and together different narratives. For a while, all of a sudden, they're going to pretend they're going to fight. England, part of colonization. Now they're going to pretend they could take a position where colonial time, all the modern countries individually grouped in together. Tactical terror from how we are bound as individuals grouped in species body. A hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise. I'm not a lawyer, not police form, not criminal, not military. This is greater than military law, which we know too. There are where we have been prevented the quality of fact-cheaping nature to explain what Jim Crow laws are about. And then we could have even, which you don't leave that out from the simultaneous. See, when you have the simultaneous, then you have means to observe, part of the hyper simultaneous. And nature demonstrates it wants us to observe. That's one of the things it is. In other words, constantly. Just like there was a coefficient and a variable, like 5x. 5 is the coefficient, x is the variable. What is hyper simultaneous is a hyper coefficient to all parts of space/existence as itself, from and as that which was and is increasingly becoming greater value as two distinct identities of sequence nature / simultaneous nature that won't mix with R3, the Trinity, bound here. Even the smallest finite thing that was ever generated has this relevant to it. One identity of hypersimultaneous is coming to, from, as, with, and for itself. Where and how hypergenesis is generating more of that which generated everything. Vaccine. Now, part of the proofs of this too are where and how theories have been applied self-value by the breaching method that used only allowed to be victims / hyper victims, and that's sustained before the Native Americans had been divided, before the colonial nations have been those forms of slaves. To partake with it and be overt / insidious with it, because no one understood how individually grouped and together. The five identity, the 1/3/5 identities of sequence / simultaneous nature that are temporarily manifest. They are as our quality of diffusion, individually grouped and together because of the engineering of positive. So, how we haven't had anyone use with us phrases like criminal insidiousness itself is evidence, because we know the time went by. We know passions and emotions spoke about the most critical subjects, like slavery, like America, like our countries, every one of them, because the human species body of volume is prevented in short words and revelations. Therefore, the protraction and a breaching method measured and maintains this distinctly from our own here, there, everywhere. See suits and ties. See the counters of them. See us since before our founders were born, before even cars were invented. The ground was tactically denatured. The suburbs were designed to cause negative value nature progressions and acts in natures. Dependencies upon mass farming, which they were forced to be, if they're gonna have, be dead or what, worse. If they didn't, everyone, we can't isolate. Oh, these people, this isn't good. That's not. We have to be led by the hyper invisible, but still discernible. Forgiveness is not to give up. It's not to let people pretend passions and emotions. Because passions and emotions only work if they're about the hyper simultaneous. See, but we are prevented that increasingly, insidiously / overtly. It is a demonstration to us. So to summarize, American history is all we needed. And we have the evidences. In other words, a predicate acts delivery system method as a criminal insidiousness delivery system method. As roles with, and as science is pretending to be our human science, but not for a breaching method. And that was sustained. And the breaching method knew everyone would be tactically, arrays of education / non-education themselves employed themselves differences to screen what used and uses what is actually manifest, where people say this, therefore that. A, therefore be bullying. The importance of a subject individually grouped or to get a science, or a subject, because again, the subject and the predicate. For example, to understand this is about the identity of volume, the invisible but still discernible verb is. And if we add ing on a verb, note its identity of relationship to itself. It changes, and that is invisible but still discernible. So it's not, we can't tell if it's positive or negative. Prayer is an aspect of contemplation, which has been replaced with theories, which had been applied for victim predator. So we have to understand not just name, we have to understand, We have to, how mandated law is offensively prevented by those pretending to be for, how they could be motivated to screen such. You have to understand the phrase differentially criminally foreign influence. Not wanting to be, but with logic that already blamed other things, others, ourselves for the real causes of negative value, nature, progressions, acts, natures at all locations. All exceptions, exception nature, appearing to be in demonstration of other are really in demonstration of the same thing. Like New York City. Shootings in New York City, sickly distinctly from Hartford, Connecticut. They're both inseparable from recorded, inseparably tied evidence that and how George Washington had to leave slavery entrenched north and south. And he wanted us to explain that. Because he and our other founders wanted and needed us to explain the nature and method of slavery sickly, distinctly against every person, against every difference. Because this breaching method had the sophistication to remember how science worked by nature before it became criminally foreign influence. And nature communicates to us to where and how words like individual, like group, so like country, and or like humanity. It has needs for these words, like or Native American, has needs for these words and phrases. That all these uses of these words and phrases have been increasingly and are increasingly tactical ulterior from. We can make things better, less plastic going into the ocean, but the plastic that has been there for a long time is already breaking down to little particles. All the freshwater resources were tactically denatured before our founders were even born. When they say what's the evidence is, there's evidences in that because we're what they call evidence and scientific or left out the criminally foreign influence databases, relationships and roles with what was manifest, where and how everybody ever was/is actually manifest. Also recorded proofs of this, where and how police departments and the other branches of government individually grouped and together, for example, value with overt criminal enterprises, with members of identity ground locations, like businesses, like shipping locations, like same time, same method, where people would communicate. This is a little rat trap / hyper rat trap that built everyone forced to tell on each other. If they're going to try to not tell on each other and only tell on the breaching method, you still have to describe. In other words, the interbranch have been attaching everybody to fake words, fake locations since we are kids. And then they use truth for lies. They have styles of people using truths for lies. They have social media, like on different social media, they ask to, we want to be able to remove your posts. Some of your posts do this, that. The agencies, the courts, and political families have roles using social media to plant evidences, fabricate audio and video transcript roles, self-value, differentially relative to differentially relative. Impositions like predicate acts against ourselves and such illusions, time impositions, how they get away with it, sequence shifting, having members need to hide things like that. Then they have to have their family members hide it. Then everyone calls each other names. Then people have to self-value roles originally instilled with the witch trials, even if they made, especially if they made them up because they told other. Witch trials in place is inseparable from where George Washington and our founders' plan had to counter extort the other founders. And here in Wethersfield, Connecticut, before the last battle of the Revolutionary War, to enable the North and South sickly themselves, counter sickly themselves, to be forced sickly because everyone had to have their roles and everyone had to speak the syntax, have the sense and sensibilities, positive and negative treatments that were forced by the breaching method that had used colonial, that logic everyone abridged remotely. It knew everyone would blame the real causes of negative about value, nature, progressions, acts, natures, other things other than or on selves. Knew force and still is forcing that only to be capable. This preaching method forces, tricks, hurts, and persuades people to self-value the roles with this done against themselves. It is true that kids, like for example, on CNN, there was, I believe it was on Shades of America. I don't remember the title, but with a Kumar Bell. I forgot what it was about. But the point is, if you try to call, or if you try to on Facebook to report child abuser, the police forms that work privately for the social media, for the businesses to have websites that host, advertise for what businesses, everything. This has not been separated from tactical / hyper tactical non-integrity, breaching screens, tools, needs and natures themselves employed, each age of fact treatment nature, to be measured and maintained, criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative treatments, wisdom and smartness as criminal insidiousness nature, definitions of it, comparisons between kids self-value by victim predators / hyper predators that knew that they could exploit this with time, other natures of worse than just organized crime and war crimes, as if we take seriously and use passions and emotions properly. Also, the interbranch have people online pretend passions and emotions with switching names and stuff like that. So not with their, directly saying fake things, because these are people who bring things before their interbranch friends. And the same names are with areas overt criminal enterprises and private ones involved with. They would tell you, everyone, if you ask them correctly. See, but they have people in the background. Everywhere the species body is, offensively having used people's names relevant to really what caused, there was an order. Before there were the orders that could be discerned with colonization, all the criminal insidiousness natures of positive and negative treatment natures, and pretending they could speak for the sciences. The sciences have the identity of the hyper simultaneous. Differentially, as the increasing value of itself distinctly to the sciences individually grouped or together when we bring up a subject like slavery. It brings up the value of what really is the value of sequence true before that. A sick breaching method had been sustained against Native Americans. See, this also separated everyone from understanding how passions and emotions only work if they stay about the simultaneous, which is actually in the hyper simultaneous. Because for example, being an individual is being a simultaneous nature, distinctly from being grouped, areas, ages, sexes, and from being the species body, is a distinct identity of simultaneous nature. And the identity of the hyper simultaneous is an extent of complete possession over all parts of space/existence. But we are prevented the extent of complete possession we have over actually what is practical reason, to use Immanuel Kant's phrase, but use it, in other words, use woke, but use it towards consciousness, towards the volume science that humanity is, as hyper Native American. The value of it, difference, see, this employed difference to measure and maintain uses of it tactically ulterior from what our natural it was about. And it's about how we could sense its identity of science. Science's perfect value progression. What really causes positive value nature progressions, action natures, evolutions, fruits, gifts, means from nowhere. It is positive to all parts of the species body simultaneously. It is hyper, additionally, positive to the ground. But we're dealing with how it demonstrates and communicates this requires us to understand and be led by how the ancients were before the scientists became criminally foreign influenced. To understand subject, to understand how it is a distinct identity of invisible but still discernible, as is the identity of volume, its identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing in value of that a verb is, and that a subject is. That there are two distinct identities of volume science. There are simultaneously two non-distinct identities of volume science. And the value of that is only increasing with two identities of complete possession / hyper possession. Also, a part of coming to and from, while as each person, each thing individually grouped it together. And while with it and for it. And it stays positive onto all parts of space nature. But Earth's a special difference when it's not coupled with where and how it is variably. There are exception nature that are temporarily and apparently appearing to be in demonstration of other. So you have to understand, for example, too, how a computer, for example, the main computer, the hardware of the computer, how its programming uses exceptions in exception nature, distinctly / non-distinctly from the programs, from the software, from those who might program into and use, the capabilities of the rest of the space in the volume of the computers. No. See, nature, the hyper as that hyper native. If we sense we have black pupils, whites of eyes, how could that not have been connected when with all these things? The responses of it were obviously recorded. There are tons of means to discern. In other words, they were also employed by the breaching method, also to screen itself, also to continually, increasingly exploit where and how we are actually syntactically manifest. This is linguistics / hyperlinguistics. But we have to be led by the hyper simultaneous and its identity of relationship to itself and the value of that as the Trinity. That is the extent we have that we have actually discerned. So this requires a quality of fact keeping that doesn't leave out so much and doesn't, pretend not to realize and actually not realize so much. Because everyone was back to all identity ground locations. So we'll address this. Thank you. Have a great night. We could do this with the New York book, the Burroughs book, which will help everyone realize and be with the rest of the countries everywhere the species body is going to help us. And other states will make their own books. And we could do that too with our states again. But to be the international. And we have to admit how every location was and is tactically denatured / hyper denatured. Not just to discern the difference between how the suburbs, since before our founding parents were born, I forgot what the Womrs. The Womrs. So we could see the small finite details. This enables us to see things that are even smaller, even deeper. They no longer walk into the puddles in the suburbs anymore. Too many years we have taken away the lawn grass clippings. Now the birds are dependent upon such. Too long, humanity, this one little species, has had been criminally foreign influenced systems. Formerly, private, criminally foreign influenced, simultaneously delusions wrought. So this method knew that modern countries individually grouped and together would have to use phrases like criminally foreign influenced to defend themselves, and they would have to do it wrong. And they would have to defend that and increasingly self-value that, being having been the case. And that was his only part of what was an unabridged, effective, complete remote possession of all locations, areas, and states, intercampuses, everywhere the sciences are manifest simultaneously, private database relationships. Two, what is recorded as phenomena, overt criminal enterprises and private ones, how they are kept, everyone with instances, relativity to that which is properly and actually only increasingly about. Positive's identity. As identity of volume we are. As humanity, every identity has an identity of relativity, what is positive and negative simultaneously. Even as the value of this complete extent of complete possession over all parts of space / existence, that is only increasing. Yeah. So it means appear. Vaccine, thank you.